try to understand what is philosophy, it seems appropriate to come back to the roots of philosophy. And for that reason, the irony seems appropriate to say that we should look at the sky. I'm going to talk a little bit about Plato. Plato, philosopher born in the 5th century BCE in Athens, ancient Greece. Plato was born from a rich family, aristocratic family, received very good education at the time, and he's known as the founder of the academy, a place that was built in a trove, a bit like this one here, between trees, a little bit outside of Athens. And there he taught students. Many of them have remained famous, like Aristotle. But why? Why then Plato became a philosopher? That must be our question. A question that is behind every other question. What was his own push towards philosophy, towards wisdom? Plato was very interested in mathematics, as you know. Well, mathematics, geometry, to be more precise. There was some elements of geometry known at the time, and of course, everybody knows how to draw a circle. What is a circle? Well, it's strange in ways because we have that shape in our mind. Everybody has this shape in their mind. We know a little bit more than this. We know that a circle is defined by a center and a series of points that are all at the same distance from the center. This being a geometrical definition of the circle. Now the circle here I've drawn is not, of course, a perfect circle. It is imperfect. It is irregular in shape, but in my mind, maybe I can have the image of a perfect circle. But is this image really perfect? Is this image really appropriate to the definition that I know of the circle that I just described? Maybe not. It seems to flicker. Imagination is maybe unreliable. Now, looking at the sky, something else might come up. Maybe because the sky is such a perfect blank sheet, I can see in the sky, I can like project my mind on this blue whitish sheet. So I project a circle there, the definition of a circle. And this gives me the notion of what an idea is, the idea of the circle. The idea of the circle is a little bit more than the geometrical object. The geometrical object is, of course, very clear to me. I understand it perfectly, I have this impression at least. But the idea of the circle is the circle itself. And all other circles, the circles I can draw, for Plato are derived from this perfect circle. They participate in it. They take the substance of being a circle and the idea of the circle. So if I come back to this circle is a circle just as long as I recognize it as a circle. I could say it's not a circle. I could see something else in it. But when I recognize the shape of the circle, I acknowledge the fact that what I see is identical with the idea of a circle that I have. Now the same could be said about a flower. What is a flower? Well, I could define flower, the idea of a flower, the idea of flower. And every flower I will see and that I will call a flower, well, I will have to check if it's really what it is. But that gives me a tool, an instrument to understand the world around me. So there are flowers in the world, and they are all built according to the same plan, the plan of the idea of the flower. So the idea of the flower is like a pattern, is a shape. As you know, the theory of ideas in English is often translated by the expression theory of forms. And it's interesting to call it this way, to talk about forms, shapes. One of the Greek words that Plato used to talk about ideas is the word eidos, which means shape. It's one of its definitions. So we have ideas and we have things, living things, elements of the world. We have trees, a lake. What is a lake? There are a lot of lakes in the world, mountains, houses, cars, etc., etc. All those things, we can understand them through the patterns that we can recognize in them. But what is the status of reality? What is the most real thing? Is it all those elements, all those beings, all those flowers that will soon disappear? They can be broken. They will die. They will give birth to other flowers, etc. That's the becoming, as Heraclitus described it. You never enter twice in the same river, because life is always changing. The only thing that is permanent is the becoming. So it doesn't seem very reliable. And Plato thought, well, if we have to build a society that would be just and to understand the truth, we should try to look for what is stable, what is reliable. And to him, the patterns that he saw everywhere were much more reliable. Much more reliable than something that you can burn or destroy, make disappear, transform, alterate in any ways. And of course, more stable than our feelings, emotions that change, and our body that changes also. All these worlds that our body informs us upon through our senses, smell, touch, taste, sight, what we hear, all of this changes all the time. It's taking hold of us, it's having a lot of impact on us, but still it's not reliable for him. So he looked in the sky, and in the sky he found those shapes, and by a twist of fate, really, he came to think that what was real was not the world that we call usually the real world, reality, but the world of ideas. A world where ideas exist forever and ever in perfect similarity, in perfect identity with themselves. The idea of the flower is the idea of the flower forever. It is eternal, it is immortal. It's not dying like those flowers. And from there, he came to design a complete system. So, if there is something that is existing forever, the idea of the flower, and the flower here, what it is for that idea, then what is the relationship between one flower, a flower of any kind, any species, and the idea? But is it really of any interest to us to understand an idea out of a context? Is it not something that is too abstract, that is too rigid? Societies, human societies, are like human flowers. They go and they grow according to their background, to the earth here, to the land, to the light they receive, to the other plants around them that leave them some space or not. They try to expand their roots. Sometimes they can, sometimes they cannot. So without this context, is it not impossible to understand what a flower is or what a society is? Or is it not just like giving a general model of how things could work, but it remains purely hypothetical? And from this hypothesis, we are in charge of trying to understand the actual occurrence of the pattern, the singularity of every living thing. If I consider that this tree belongs to the sensible world, and there is an idea of the tree in the intelligible world, in the world of ideas, the idea of the tree. Now, if I consider this tree as one occurrence of the idea of the tree, this tree doesn't seem so important anymore. If this tree is this tree and nothing else, then it has an importance as this tree. But if I say that this tree is just an occurrence of the idea of the tree, then it's one tree among millions. And I've done something else when I've said that. I have reified this tree. I have made of it an object. So this tree now, another tree, if it's only a tree according to the idea of the tree, then this tree here is an object. It's far away from the real tree, the idea of the tree. And when I look at this tree, what I see are the properties of the tree, of the idea of the tree. I know it's made of wood because it's a tree, and I know I can use it for different purposes. I can use its wood to make fire, to build something, a house, a boat, etc. So what I see are the properties. The patterns, to look at the world in patterns, allows me to use the world around me according to the properties I know belong to each of those things. Now, this is probably more or less okay if you consider trees. It becomes a different matters when you consider other plants, animals, and humans, of course. But should it be really different? Now, when we consider human beings, can we say that human beings are just occurrences of an idea, the idea of human beings? Well, Plato was careful not to get so far as that, and he said that every human being has a soul. This soul is able to look directly at the world of ideas, and that's what makes the human soul different from the souls of animals, for example. Animals are not able to look at the world of ideas. Thus, there is an essential difference for Plato between human beings and animals. So here it is, a human being trying to do some philosophy in the middle of nowhere. So it would mean that this human being has a soul and is able to look at the world of ideas. There's nothing I can say against that. I'm talking about Plato, I'm talking about his philosophy. I think I understand something of it. Sometimes I also think that I'm able to criticize it, maybe wrongly, probably wrongly, because Plato lived so long ago and thought in a different language. So what could I say about it? What do I really understand about it? I have no idea. Sometimes I have the impression that I'm very far from the truth about Plato, but we're trying to gather some elements and to make something out of it. Anyway, so I am not reified as a human being because I have this soul. But still, there is an element that is a little bit reified. Those souls themselves, they participate in the end to the same supreme idea as do the trees, the flowers, etc. This supreme idea, as you know, is the idea of the good. So the idea of the good is what makes every idea to exist, what gives it existence, what gives it also the capacity to be seen by our soul, because both our soul and the ideas participate to the same thing, that is, the supreme idea of the good. Since we share this common element, we are able to see each other, to understand. And we participate somehow in one another. Those ideas, we have them, and without us to see the ideas, I don't know if they would exist. That's a pure hypothesis. Probably for Plato they do, because everything else exists, and everything else is also in the dependence of the supreme idea of the good. So we are in this situation, and we have to understand what is human nature and how we should be able to organize it in the best way possible. So there is a society, there is a group of people, and this group of people, they go together to decide how they would live. You remember that in ancient Greece there were a lot of talks about how the city should be governed, what should be the laws for the people. In the 5th century, Athens new group of people coming from Sicily with a new kind of teaching. This teaching was rhetorics. Rhetorics is the art of persuading other people. And to persuade is this art of persuasion is a very dangerous tool, Plato thought, because you can persuade probably anybody of anything if you are good enough with your art. So Plato was a bit afraid of those rhetoricians, but himself received, of course, an education in rhetorics. And there was a group of people among rhetoricians who had an ambition a bit superior to just try to convince other people. They began to describes themselves as sophists. So sophist is just like the word philosophers, comes from the Greek word sophos, which means wisdom. So somehow they said, they pretended to be wise and to be able to understand, to know reality, and to know what one should do in this situation or that situation. So in the end, we have a confrontation between those different sophists, because each of them pretends to have the truth. And at the beginning, we have to consider that Plato himself is nothing else than just another sophist. But a sophist that did his sophistic so well that he gets to call himself and to be called by others a philosopher. So he invented this word philosopher to distinguish himself from the sophist, probably. He's not a sophist, he's not somebody who possesses wisdom. He's somebody who loves wisdom, so he's always in a quest, and that's how philosophy should be, in his opinion, in his view. So Plato began to think about how a society should be organized. He tried to establish the just way in which a society should function, but for people to believe in his theory, people would have to believe that actually Plato's philosophy was more true than all the other sophists' propositions. So for that he needed the idea. He needed to have this understanding that there is a reality beyond the reality that we can experience through our senses. And this reality is the world of ideas. So the world of ideas gave Plato the ground to defeat the sophists and to go against this relativism that was so powerful at the time. Everybody could be convinced or convince everybody else of anything. That was the game. There was, like Protagoras invented a discipline that he called heuristics. Heuristics is the art of rhetoric, but pushed to its extreme limits. It's the art of defeat your opponent in a rhetorical contest. And it's really an activity that is with a lot of competition. So the aim of it is to win. It's not to get to the truth, is to win over your opponent. So Plato said, all those games, they are not true. They are approximations. They are manipulations of the language. All those rhetoricians, they are great orators, but they don't get to the truth at all. They are not. And so he said, my philosophy, on the other hand, with my philosophy, you will get to the truth, something that is stable, something that is reliable, and that will exist forever. It will be reliable even in 200 years. So really, you can build your society on it. You can build your empire on it. It will last forever if you follow my guidelines. So that's how Plato came up with the notion that the city should be ruled by philosophers. Because who else than philosophers, than people who know the truth, than people who know those ideas that never change, the patterns that we can recognize everywhere in the world, and that give us the possibility to use the world in a good way. That means according to what the world is, because we won't be using the world according to our imagination or preconceived ideas of what is the world. We will use the world according to the ideas, and the ideas are the truth of those things. So this is really what makes Plato's philosophy such a turning point in the history of philosophy. So it seems that Plato used his theory of ideas to create his ideal city. In the Republic, Plato has divided the human population in different groups. Different groups, they look very much like different species. different race, even one could say. Those different groups, as you remember, at the very top, leading the city, the philosophers, called the guardians. Then under it you have the auxiliaries, soldiers, who have the task to defend the city from invaders from the outside, but also to play the role of the police inside the walls of the city. And then you've got the biggest part of the population, farmers, all people with different crafts, the population. And this division really created what we call in modern language classes. Different class of people that would receive different injunctions, different kind of rules. And that is very manifest in Plato's theory with the virtues that are attached to each group. The guardians need to be wise because they exert one human capacity more than the others. It is the logos, the capacity to speak, to think, and of course to think according to Plato's philosophy, so to always have in view with their soul the ideas, so as to decide upon just laws. The auxiliaries are associated with another virtue, courage, because they are also associated with another part of the body, not the head, but the arms. And of course, their virtue is associated with their function. Just like the guardians should be wise because their function is to think, to have an eye on the ideas, to create just laws, the soldiers, the auxiliaries, should be courageous because it is the virtue that is appropriate to their function, which is to defend the city and to maintain order. Now the population, the general population, is associated with moderation because it is associated with another part of the human body, the stomach, the guts, the genitals. And those are, according to Plato, the place for desires, what he calls epitumia in Greek. Desire is known for Plato to be a place of many disorders and chaos. It has to receive a law from the upper part of the body, from the upper part of the society, from the guardians. And so like that, we really have a situation where human society is divided into three different classes. And for each of those classes, you have a different set of rules. The people, the general population, they have to exert a certain discipline over themselves, and if they don't, then the auxiliaries are coming to enforce this discipline upon them. The auxiliaries have received their orders directly from the guardians. Their name implies it. They are the auxiliaries of the guardians, so they are in direct relation with them and they obey them directly. They are the secular arm of the guardians. So it really gives us a notion of what we understand as a society and how our society still today is built on what ideas, on what notion, on what general plan. But we always have the impression that there is a mistake probably in that vision, because somebody is not born a guardian, right? How could you know if one person is good to become a guardian, or good to become an auxiliary, or good to become a farmer? Maybe some people are born from parents who are farmers, but they have other capacities, other possibilities, other desires to become something else. And the same goes with so many different things. So how could it work? Well, Plato resolved that question in a very interesting way, and it shows us how much he was aware of the body and of those problems that we are speaking about now. Because he said the guardians, they should be selected from very early age, and they should be educated to be guardians from their very early childhood. So it goes through the body, like Nietzsche would have said, and not only through the mind. So we give shape to a human being, and here comes the reification, so the human transformed into a thing on which we can have an influence, an impact, a forming impact, give it a shape. So the guardian, nobody is born a guardian. You will create a guardian, you will educate a guardian. Just the same way you will educate an auxiliary, you will educate somebody that would become a farmer or something else. So in this situation, we also understand that that doesn't happen in just a lifetime. This kind of organization would be realized upon several generations. And there again, we come close to many things that Nietzsche thought and written. Several generations are needed for the classes to develop as classes and not to be just like a momentaneous creation, production. It's not the question of one lifetime, it's a question of what will happen in 3 or 4 generations once we've implemented something. And a good example of this, of course, would be, for example, to look at European societies in the Middle Ages, for example, or to look at the situation in India with the caste system. The caste system has developed over several generations and has become so powerful that it is very difficult to change from this model of society to another. And of course, with Marx in the 19th century, we can look at another type of class society that has developed with the French Revolution that Marx called a bourgeois revolution. This bourgeois revolution means that at one point a new class appeared and took the power, and another class appeared also but was submitted to the first one, the proletariat. So you have the workers on one side and you have the owners on the other side. Owners of what? Owners of the machines, owners of the fields, the land, owners of everything, while the workers, they only possess their body, and the workforce, they have to sell it to the owners in exchange for a salary, for a wage. That creates two different classes with two different kind of activities, two different kind of laws as well, two different kinds of things they can do and things they cannot do, which become little by little things they should do and things they should not do, things they tell to themselves. You should not do that because you are a worker, or because you are a bourgeois, or because you are a farmer, or because you are a soldier. A soldier is not raised in the same way than a farmer. They don't have the same reflexes, they don't have the same thoughts. And that's what we try to understand when we do philosophy as well, is to understand the thoughts that everybody has, and to understand why they have those thoughts and not others, why they have those moral rules and not others. And is it like the right way to govern a society? Is government even the good way to live a human life? So this is all the questions that have been born with Plato and his philosophy. Now, of course, when we look at this landscape, it's something completely different. With this landscape, we know that somehow we are a production of nature itself. We are born from this ground, from this chaos of nature, just like everybody else, everything else, every flower, every tree, every drop of water. And we have to ask ourselves where reality is. Is reality really in the world of ideas, in the patterns that we have probably invented to understand the world around us and make use of it? Or is the reality in the becoming of all of that? In what happens to be here? In what happens to be known by us through our senses? So this is a very important question, of course, and the question of becoming against being, those two types of philosophies. Plato, a philosopher of the being, that tried to look for something that is reliable, always there, permanent, and he found it only in the world of ideas because everything else changes. And philosophers of the becoming, like Nietzsche, for example, or like Heraclitus, who tried to understand how we can exist, how we can live in a world that always changes. We can still philosophize, but how?